Hey guys, in today's tutorial we'll be making a mermaid skirt using an hiking technique. If you're looking for a trend that is more defined and fuller than a regular mermaid skirt, this technique is for you. So to make this technique, I folded my fabric into two, and the base of what I am cutting for the front panel is 20 inches. Now this 20 inches has a quarter of my hip circumference plus the seam allowance that I want to add, and I will still have allowance for the side flea. So I marked the waistline, and from it I measured the hip line. Now I am placing the vertical dimensions of my measurement first. So I have the waistline, the hip line, and I'm measuring 20 inches for my knee line. So to get your knee line, you measure it to your kneecap, and then whatever you have, you subtract 3 or 4 inches, and that will be your knee line. Okay, so from the waistline, I am measuring the length of the skirt, and from the fabric we have 45 inches, and I will need more than 45 inches for the length of the skirt, because I'll be adding extra 7 inches to the length, just so it will be a floor length proper. So I'll be adding a piece of fabric to this length. Now Ankara has 45 inches as its length. Because of the pattern I have on this Ankara, I couldn't place it any other way, so I have to add. And then I'll cut it exactly what I have for this upper panel. Okay, and then I'm adding about 12 inches. I will not be using the whole of this 12 inches. I'll take out about 7 or 8 inches from it, but I just want to cut out 12 inches, just just to have that ease when I'm cutting. So I'll cut it exactly the size I have for the upper panel, and I would like to trim out that that yardish part, that trimming. Okay, I don't like it showing on my garment, so I'll just take it out. So when I'm taking out the ½ inch, I know that I'm not having it anywhere on the skirt. So I'll cut it out on both sides. And then I'll open up this fabric. I'll open up the piece, and I'll open up the main, the main fabric, and then I'll bring them together at the midpoint and sew it from one edge to the other. This way I have added some inches to the length of the fabric. Now if you have a fabric that is about 60 inches length, you won't need to do this, because already you will have enough length at your disposal. After adding to the length, we'll now place the horizontal dimensions. So going back to the waistline, I will place a quarter of the waist circumference, which is 8.5 inches. And the waist circumference I'm using here is 34 inches. And from the waistline, I'm going downwards with ½ inch, and I will connect it to what I have as the waist measurement. Now that quarter of waist measurement, that's where I'm connecting it to. And then we'll be using hip allocation for this skirt. I like this dartless method. So I'll measure from the waistline. I'm having 9 inches for the hip line, and this is the formula for the hip line. Now the formula for the front panel is hip circumference divided by 2 minus 1.5 inches. Now I have 45 inches as the hip circumference. I divided that by 2, and I have 22.5. 22.5 minus 1.5, that's 21 inches. Then I divided that by 2 because we're cutting the front panel on fold. So dividing 21 inches by 2, I have 10.5 inches. And that's what I have for the hip measurements for the front panel. So after I've gotten 10.5 for the measurement, I'll place it on the hip line. And then on the hip line, I am going upward and downward with 1 inch, just so to contour it proper. And then I will place what I have as a hip measurement on all these points. And then I'll connect the waistline to the first point before the hip line. Okay, now the second point below the hip line would go to the knee. All right, so at the knee there, I will subtract 2 inches from what I have as a hip measurement for the front panel. And then I'll be going down and up this knee line with ½ inch. And just like I did to the hip line, I'll connect the second point I have below the hip line to the first point I have above the knee line. This is just for a proper contouring, okay? So then I'll measure from the waistline to the length. Now the length of the skirt I'm using is 42 inches, and then I'm adding 7 more inches for the same allowance, for the extra allowance, and then I'll add 1 more just to make it 50. Yes, 50 as a round figure. Okay, so altogether I'm adding 8 inches, as the extra to the length. That's because I want it to be a floor length proper. So at that point, I'm drawing a horizontal line, and then I'll place what I have for the hip measurement for this front panel, and then I'll add about 7 inches extra for the flare allowance, and then I'll go up with 1 inch and then contour it to meet the hip measurement I have there. Now remember, I placed the hip measurement first before I added the flare allowance. And so from that flare allowance, after going up with 1 inch, I connected it to the hip measurement. So then I'll connect what I have at the length there to the knee. Remember the second point we have below the knee, like I said, is for contouring. And so I'll connect it to meet the length. With this, guys, we are done with the front panel. Okay. So after connecting this point, I'll need to add my seam allowance. And for this skirt, I'll be using 1.5 inches as my seam allowance. And that I'll be adding all the way from the waist to the length of the front panel. After connecting the dots, I'll simply cut this out. So we move on to the back panel. Now the back panel, I folded it into 2. Now I have 60 inches as the base for the back panel. I will explain it. Now this is the front panel, okay? Just so you will know the measurements for the train you'll be using. You measure from your knee to the length, and that I have 30. And I'll be adding 10 extra inches to that 30, and we have 40. So at the point of 40, remember I folded this horizontally. At the point of 40, that will be the back center. I'll create a vertical line, and that becomes the back center. This fabric I folded for the back panel is 60 inches on fold. So after backing the back center, I have extra 20 inches, so I can place the front panel. Remember, we use 20 inches as the base for the front panel. So after marking the 40 inches for the back center, I'll bring in the front panel and place it on that line. Remember, for the back panel, I equally added few inches to the length of this fabric, so we'll have our desired length. So after placing the front panel on the back panel like this, I'll go upward at the waistline with 1 inch, and then I'll connect it to what I have as the waist circumference. So the next thing, I'll go in with ½ inch. You can use 3/4 or 1 inch, okay, just to contour that back indentation. Remember, if you're using it as a gown, you will need that to go in without bulging. For the back panel, hip circumference divided by 2 plus 1.5. So 45 inches divided by 2 plus 1.5 is that's 24. Dividing that by 2, we have 12 inches. So that's what we have for the hip allocation for the back panel. So then, just like I did to the front panel, I went up and down with 1 inch just for the contouring. And then I will take it from the ½ inch I have at the waistline there. I'll take it to the first point I have on the hip line. Like I said, I am just doing this for the contouring. It's not a big deal. You can choose to ignore it, okay, as long as you know how to use your curve ruler properly. So then I will go to the knee line and we'll extend the knee. And we'll extend the knee line. I'm going upward and downward with 1/2 inch, just like I did to the front panel. So on these lines, I will place 1 inch inward from the back center line. Now 1 inch inward, just to contour the knee and make it more fitted. So that point, I will now connect it to the second point I have below the hip line. Again, I said it's for contouring. I'll connect it like this. And now this shape that I have formed becomes the new back center. Okay. So then, following this contour, I'll be adding 1 inch for the zipper allowance, following the shape that I already have for the back panel. And then I'll connect the dots. So when I'm done with that, we'll move to the arcing technique proper. Now from the knee line, I'm going upwards with 5 inches. Now if you want this knee to be very fitted, you can do 2 inches. And at that point, I am extending it to the edge of this allowance I added for the flare. Okay. Then I will add 1/2 inch. Remember, we're cutting it on the fabric, so I need to add all the same allowance I'll be needing for this. So I added 1/2 inch from the back center to the end of this flare allowance. And then when I'm done with that, I'll use my curve ruler just to connect the zipper allowance I have up there, to connect it to this 1/2 inch. You will do the same thing to the other line. Okay. So I connected the zipper to this 1/2 inch like this. When I'm done with this, I'll get an angle 45°. Now this arcing technique is using 90 degrees. So I get an angle of 45. That means dividing it by 2. So from the point I have for the knee, at the knee line, I just created this angle. If you're doing just a normal mermaid skirt for bridesmaids, you can use this as well if you don't want to use the arcing technique. After getting this, I'll take it to the point where I marked at the knee line. Remember that 5 inches upward. And then I am using 41 inches. Remember, 40 inches is what I used for the flare allowance. So I'm adding 1 inch for the seam allowance because I will be, double folding it for double folding it at the hem. So I'll take it round the corners. Now it's not just everywhere, it's just around the corners there, just to give it a definite shape. Now I did mention at the start that if you need a fuller and more defined train, this arcing technique is a go-to technique for a mermaid skirt. So after getting that curve around there, I'll just mark it at several points and then I'll connect it to meet the length of the skirt. So when I'm done with that, I'll simply cut out what I have for the back panel. And the next thing, we'll be joining this allowance, the back center, install our zipper, join the sides, and then you can use lining. You can make it full lining. You can choose to even add crinoline to the edges. It depends on what you're making with this technique. So this is what we have. All right. And then I will take it to the machine and I'll join the sides, install the zipper, turn the waist, and give it a good press. I'll double fold it at the hem, and that's it for our mermaid skirt using an arcing technique. So this is what we have after joining all of that. So if this tutorial adds any value to you at all, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment for me in the comment section. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.